Hello and welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast. I am Jack Roney.
And I'm Harry Colfer.
Hey Harry, we've got another special guest with us. I'm looking forward to introducing T.M. Clark. So I'll just introduce Tina. So Zimbabwean-born T.M. Clark now calls Australia home. Tina weaves her fascination for diverse cultures, wildlife, and storytelling into her literature. She's published 7 adult novels as well as 3 children's books and been nominated for a Queensland Literary Award and is a Children's Book Council notable. Tina is the winner of the 2022 Killer Nashville Claymore Award for Best Action Adventure. She coordinates the CYA Writers and Illustrators Conference and also co-hosts the Writers at Sea retreat on board cruise ships. So thanks for joining us, Tina.
Thank you for having me.
I just have to warn you, for those who are getting a bit of a video snippet here, Tina's just being sort of like, I think somebody's prowling behind you at the moment. I think you know about the lion that's hiding up behind you.
A lion.
Looks a little dangerous, but anyway, carry on. Sorry, Jack.
So you're being stalked by a lion. I guess that's probably a really good segue in terms of your books. So given your background, your adult books have all got an African theme. Would that be fair to say?
Yep, that is very, very fair to say.
So we'll talk about that. And again, anyone who's having a look at T.M. Clark's website, you'll see all her books are there available and all fantastic covers, all with a unique African animal on the front. So fantastic books there to dive into. So knowing that your history, you come from Zimbabwe, you've eventually moved to Australia, and I believe you also lived in England and South Africa for times as well. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah.
Girl of the world.
Girl of the world. So, and obviously you've now got into writing these books with quite a strong African theme. But can you tell us, the first question I always like to ask is, what's your journey? I think any emerging writers who are listening and they're sort of looking at people like yourself who've had success with publishing, and they're always interested to know, how did you get from from what was your journey from A to B? And everyone's probably got their own journey. What was your journey? What was kind of the starting point? And kind of
I hate this question, but I love this.
It's an inevitable one.
It is.
All righty.
Tell us your story.
Okay. So my story began in Paris, where my husband dared me to write a story for a men's magazine. So I wrote a story and sent it off, and I got £50 for a 280-word story. And I thought, this is easy money. And I was hooked on writing. I then started recording and then writing down my own stories and writing stories for kids. But at the time, my mum was in theology college and she had run out of money. And if I made £50 in the UK, that was 500 Rand, and that would get her through like a month and a half of groceries and stuff. So the end of my mom's theology college was paid for with smart money. And then when I actually got to her graduation and I said, hey, Mom, this is what I did, she went, well, one day, please just write a book that I could brag about. So, yeah, so there we go. I had to go write that book.
Now, come on, you're gonna have to say what the men's magazine was. I mean, it could be, something pretty tame, but what are we talking about here?
No, it wasn't tame. It was men's magazine stuff.
And what was the story? What was the story that you wrote?
It was a smutty story, and I don't even know where. I'm sure I've got a copy somewhere. But it was really not it was very erotic. It was before the time that erotica was quite accepted. And yes, so I did start there, and and I kind of got hooked on earning money, where I could stay at home and I could actually earn some money without going out of the house and working and doing a proper job. Well, a proper job, but you know what I mean.
And what about prior to that? Did you always have this sort of inner burning to write, even as a younger person?
I never did. I'm actually dyslexic, and I was always a storyteller. Like, we've got many, many different Easter things in our household, like, the person who helps the Easter bunny and everything else. And those I had made up when I was a kid. We had a Mr. Sucker Thumb who I used to tell my younger sister that he was going to come, he was going to cut off her thumb, and then she was going to have no thumb, and how her hand was going to look. And I was
pretty brutal.
Yeah, pretty brutal. So I was always a storyteller, but I was not a person who wrote things down. I was dyslexic, and so I was like, I'm still dyslexic, but I started reading quite late, like really reading. I could get by at school and stuff, but I really only started reading like, 14, 15, when I found romance novels and Mills and Boon. So as a late sort of reader, after that, I just read everything I could to try and catch up, and there was all these beautiful stories out there. And then, I left school. I actually did write 3 chapters by hand of a Mills and Boon on the beach sometime, but I don't know what happened to it. And then, life happened, and I just, left it. And yeah, and it wasn't until we actually got to Paris that it actually got sparked again. But I had been doing technical writing because I was writing ISO 9000 manuals. So I had been actually writing, it was just technical, not fiction. So yeah, and then it was just from there, basically learning how to write children's books, which are not actually as easy as everybody thinks they are. And then I started writing adult novels because this story was just burning in my head, and I really wanted to write for Mills and Boon. So I targeted Mills and Boon for 10 years. And eventually poor Brenda Chin, she sent me which is an editor she was in the Blaze line. She sent me a letter after about my 4th full rejection saying, Tina, your stories are too big. They have too many characters and too much plot line to fit into this Blaze. Please do not send us anymore. So it was kind of like, I thought it was like a closed door, but it wasn't. It was actually a closed door, but a huge open window, because it gave me the freedom to then write the story I wanted to. I wasn't trying to squish my words into like, the 55,000, 60,000. And so my first novel was, 120,000 words. So it's, yeah, there's a lot there. So yeah, between that and then, mentorships and stuff like that, I was able to just expand and start writing adult novels. And then, so my first published was a kid's book. My first book published was actually a kid's book. And then I started the CYA conference because I went, this can't be so hard to kind of publish there has to be an easy way. Start a conference, as you do, you start a conference to try and make it easier for, the next book and everybody else to make it easy. And then I concentrated on adult books after that. So, on thrillers and family saga style action adventure books after that. Then my first...
Was your 120,000 word one, was that actually a romance, or was that an action one?
No, it started off as a romance. It started off as just
that's a lot. That's a long for a romance.
Yeah, no, it started as a romance, and then it went through the whole gauntlet. I changed it all to erotic, and then I changed it all back to normal. It took me 10 years to actually fit where the book actually fitted and landed up. And no, that's definitely an action adventure, and it's not a romance because, spoiler alert, in romances you have to have a happy ever after.
Happy ending. Yeah.
Yep. And that book, I killed my hero, so there's no happy ever after. So yeah, so it's not a romance, but there are romantic elements within it. So which was really interesting. So I was really lucky. I landed up with my dream publisher anyway. I'd always wanted to write for Harlequin. I had been sending them those, the submissions for years, and then I landed up with Harlequin Australia anyway. They're part of HarperCollins. So I landed up with my dream publisher. So I was really, really lucky. My sort of like really gold star lucky.
So I've got your list of books in front of me. Which was your first published title, your first adult book?
My first adult book was My Brother But One. So that's the one with the elephants on it.
Yes, I see that. Okay,
he's good with picture cues.
I was looking. There's another one with elephants, The Avoidable Orphan. That's one of your children's books, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's an all ages book. That's actually that book comes before Child of Africa. So that's like the origin story of Child of Africa, but it can be read by kids as well as adults. So yeah,
cool. So I'm looking again, magnificent covers. You got My Brother But One, Song of the Starlings, Child of Africa. We've got some rhinos, Tears of the Cheetah with cheetahs, Cry of the Firebird, a beautiful sort of sunset blazing red sort of cover, The Avoidable Orphan,
I love that you couldn't say, oh, okay, with a flamingo on it. Yes.
The flamingo. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you can. I think it's got a bird with long legs and a big beak. That's a flamingo.
No, the flamingo is really important. So Amy Andrews, I was sitting next to her at a conference and we were chatting about it. And I was going, I'm never getting a pink cover. Never, not with what I write. And she said, write a book about flamingos.
Flamingos.
So I specifically wrote about flamingos to get a pink book.
But it kind of looks more like a blazing red cover to me than pink.
It is. The self-published one is more blazing red, yes.
Right.
The trade one was more pink, but it's still, yeah, more red than pink. But it's as close as pink as I was ever getting in my genre.
I spent some time in the Turks and Caicos Islands, which are in the Caribbean, and they have flamingos, obviously, over there. But they pronounce them flamingos. So, so if you have problems saying flamingo, you can go with flamingo, which is what all the locals say, which was like, huh?
And I'm just looking at your other two books. You've got Nature of the Lion, with an impressive lion on that cover, and Shooting Butterflies with giraffes and a nice sunset in the background. So yeah, really powerful sort of African themed stories. So you said My Brother But One was the first. So can you just really, if we could just hone in on that first book, you said you scored your first publishing deal through Harlequin. Can you just step us through that process? I guess probably a lot of writers are thinking, when you get your foot in the door, you get that first publishing deal with a traditional publisher. For a lot of authors, that's the start of greater things to come, and publication of other books. So for you, that's effectively your starting point. How did you get to that in terms
that would
of
be my big one?
Yeah, so that's kind of. Did you have an agent? Did you go through all the submissions and rejections? What's your story on that?
No, mine was an elevator pitch, or let's say an anti-elevator pitch, because I was literally in an elevator. I stepped in and I knew Hayley Cairns. She worked for Harlequin and I'd seen, we'd been to many conferences together. She knew I ran CYA conference. And I got into the lift and I was quite annoyed that I had just had a pitch with a lady from the States, and I swear she rolled her eyes at the story. And I was like, how rude can you get? And so I got into the lift and Hayley was there and I just let rip, because it was, she was somebody I knew. It didn't matter that she was an editor. As far as I was concerned, they do, romances. They weren't going to publish my book. And so I did this whole anti-pitch on my book. When she said, oh, what's your book about? I said, you don't have to know about my book, Hayley. You're not going to, you can't do it. I kill my hero. And we went into this thing about my book and why she wouldn't want to actually buy it. And so it was like an anti-pitch and I was just ranting. And then she said, oh, send it to me. And I went, oh, you don't have to be nice. Don't worry. It's fine. I just, had a bad, an off time. So this time we out the lift, we're still chatting. And she said, send me the book. I went, yeah, sure, thanks, bye. And had no intention of sending the book. And then about 3 days later, I had to send her an email because I was doing, Helen Young was doing a conference up in the Cairns, and I was going to get the books from somebody else on a plane here at the airport and then give them onto the plane that they could get up to her. And they were from Harlequin. So I had to contact Hayley and I said, hey, Hayley, I'm the go-between on this book deal, going between these two planes. And she said, well, we sorted that out. And she said, and where's your manuscript? And I said, you don't have to be nice. She said, send the manuscript. And I sent it. And 6 months later, she had got married in the meantime. So I got this email coming through from, she used to be Hayley Cairns, she became Hayley Nash. And I sort of looked at it and it said contract. And I just went, oh, spam. And I just sort of junked it. And then I went, hang on, that's a really, that name, because the way it's spelt is not normal for Hayley. It's a different spelling. So I had to actually go fetch it out of junk. And yep, it was actually, they didn't phone. Everyone always says, oh, they phone you. No, mine was just an email that came up as, oh, sorry it took so long, but, that's good news. We want to offer you a contract. It was like, holy my gosh.
Wow. Well, that's
wow.
We're very thankful that you
yeah,
like
my
you got
dad
that out of your
came
junk.
running.
So there was no
probably not something that anyone else can emulate, though. It's go in and rant at somebody. It's probably not going to get you the deal, is it?
I don't think so. I think I did absolutely everything wrong that an author can do wrong. I did wrong. I mean, she said send it. I went, no, I'm not sending it. You're just being nice. And I just, yeah, I think I did everything wrong, but it just turned out right. So I was just very, very lucky.
The power of reverse psychology, I guess.
Or the power of a good story,
Well, yeah.
That'll be it.
So I've just got, so your first book, My Brother But One, I can see the cover here, and the sort of the elevator pitch line on the front cover says an epic saga exploring the violence and traditions of rural Africa. So if you had to do, I'll put you on the spot, if you had to do a 30-second elevator pitch right now to tell us about that first book, what would it be?
Oh, you just read it.
No. Give us the rant. Give us the rant. That'll be so much better.
Give me the rant.
You don't want to read this. It's rubbish.
Oh no, on that book. Oh,
Sorry,
it would
carry
probably
on.
be an Australian Ashley is a fish out of water in Africa fixing pumps, and she comes across. Oh goodness! You see, pictures I have to practice again and again and again. I am useless. I actually have to type them out and really put them into my head. I can't come up with them on the spot.
I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. That was a bit rude of me, wasn't it?
That's okay. But yeah, something about
That's usually my job.
out of water. So is what I would put in there. So
okay, so so your first, so there was no agent involved. That your conversations was based on, you were kind of a little bit known by these people because of you. You already started hosting the CYA conference, and I guess that also highlights the importance of starting to get yourself known or getting some breakthrough in the industry. You were doing something else, something very proactive, and running a conference, and you'd already started to develop your bit of a profile through that.
Yeah, but she's also from Romance Writers. So I had joined Romance Writers Association of Australia very early, and she was always there, and it's a really friendly organization, and I knew her from that as well. So very much so. It's that networking thing, I think, that is really, really important, especially in Australia. Going to all the different conferences, belonging to different groups, and getting to know the editors and the agents and everybody on a social basis as well is really, really important.
Yeah, because a lot of it is, it's about the marketability of the author, and obviously you've got to have a great book to pitch, but they also want to see that you're a sort of person they want to work with.
Totally. Yep.
So you had your first book, you received your first traditional publishing contract. Tell us about that experience. I mean, when you saw that, luckily you retrieved that contract out of your junk mail. I had to read through it, and your first traditional publishing contract, and what were the emotions associated with that?
Emotions with that, obviously, just absolutely thrilled, like, because that was my dream. It was always my dream, or it became my dream, and it became an obsession as well, and I think I became very targeted. About 3 years before that, a friend of mine had said to me, stop doing all this charity work that you do, stop writing grants for people, just concentrate on your own stuff, get yourself going forward. You can come back and do stuff like that once you've got a couple of books under your belt again. So I had sort of concentrated really hard on getting that book into as good a shape as I could at the time. And obviously, 10 years ago, I look back and I go, oh, I could have done that different. I could have done that. But at the time, you do as good as you can. And then it was basically, I had been in the industry long enough to know that I needed somebody to read my contract. So I'd taken my contract to Alex Adset to actually read it for contract approval. I know there's other people who do it, but I knew Alex again from the Romance Writers, and she had come to see her. And so it was, so she read my contract. Yes, you have to pay for that. And then we just worked together, and it was actually really interesting because I got orphaned very, very early on in the process. So that means that my editor who bought me actually left. So I had an assistant who was just like the office assistant while they waited for an editor to come in to Harlequin at the stage, because it was quite small still, and they were still building themselves up. So the assistant basically did everything, and then she sent it out to an external editor, which we were really lucky to get, who did other thrillers and stuff like that. So the editing part was really, really great, but the actual going through the motions was her and I both learning how to do things, which was quite interesting. And then right at the end, Sue Brockhoff came. She got employed by Harlequin, and then she took over. And she, like, before that, we weren't even going to have a photo of me in the book. We weren't even going to have a bio or anything. And she went, you can't do this. You know, yes, we've made her androgynous as TM, but you still have to have this in the book somewhere. So she sort of like put that all in right at the end, which was quite, it was really lovely that she did get there before, you know, before it actually went out. So it was doable, but it was an interesting process. And, you know, one I then carried on and did another 5 with them with. So I was really happy there. Yeah.
And that was going to be my next question. So after you've secured your first, you then secured publishing contracts for another subsequent. How many? You said how many times?
Yeah,
another 5?
I did 6 with them in the end. So so that was a single book contract. Then I did a 2-book contract. And then after that, I did another 2-book contract, and then a 1-book contract. I can't remember, but yeah, they were just sort of. But then the last one, after the last one, it was like Harlequin. HarperCollins had taken over, and they changed the way. You know, when I first started, I could sell. My contract just said, African theme book over 100,000 words. But by the last contract, I had to give them the first 3 chapters. I had to give them a synopsis, and they were a lot more. They were like, even though I had all these bestsellers behind me, I still had to give them a lot of information as to what I was going to hand in. Whereas when I first started writing, they just trusted me, and they went, okay, just give us a book, you know, this. And so, which is really, it's a really great place to be in, because it gave me, and I didn't know it at the time, that it was giving me such freedom to write. And then the tighter that their parameters got for, you know, okay, now you have to give us a full synopsis. I'm like, but, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in my book yet, and that sort of thing. So yeah. It was, it sort of like started, you know, narrowing down the field as to exactly what I could write. So which was quite interesting.
Yeah. That does suggest that you're a bit of a pantser. Is that the case?
I am a pantser, but I'm also a plotter. So I do all these character developments and stuff like that, and I do know where my story's going, but I get sort of like 3/4 of the way through, and then I know where it's going to end, but I write between that section and that section. I know something has to happen, and I sit down and I write that, and my head sort of just comes to the party, and the voices do their thing, and I write that. So, which I'm very lucky of that.
Are they all standalone books, or are they series?
No, they're all standalone, but they're all within my own world of Africa. So you'll find like little Easter eggs, like the people from Shooting Butterflies will pop up in Child of Africa, you know, and so then like the people from Cry of the Firebird, they pop up in Lion. So, you know, so you get little Easter eggs all over the place where the worlds do connect. So it's sort of, I call it my Africa, because it's my world where I can connect people like that. So,
and from book 1 to 7, do you think, looking at them sort of collectively, has there been an evolution? Has there been a change or a shift, or would you say that you've kind of followed the same format, that the books are all very similar, or there's been a significant shift as you sort of progressed?
No, my books are all very, very different. Every single book, there's no formula in those books. There's the formula, I guess, is, you know, you get into Africa, something happens, you get out alive, hopefully at the end. There's always a body count. I think the thing that's probably changed the most is the amount of graphic scenes that I had in it. Like my first one, I had a really graphic rape scene, which now looking back, I don't think I would write a graphic rape scene again. It's like, okay, been there, done that, don't want to do it again. You know, stuff like that, I think has evolved. In Tears of the Cheetah, I have a very graphic making love scene, and it's really tenderly done and everything else, but in later I tended to close the door. But you know, it just depends what type of reader you are. So, you know, some people really like that door open and knowing what's going on, or the stable open, or whatever I've put it in. So it's, you know, It just
Fair enough.
yeah, it just depends on the book. Some books just lead themselves to having that open door where others don't. Like, you know, the last book I wrote, which was Starlings, Song of the Starlings. I mean, that was about child trafficking. There was no way that I was ever going to have you know, a lovely sex scene in that. There was, you know, that book is about child trafficking. It just did, you know, something like that doesn't fit into that theme. So yeah, whereas my new book that I am writing at the moment, and I'm, you know, in my second draft, that leads itself to, you know, a beautiful scene. So yeah.
So do you think your books, one of my questions was, you know, where do you see your books sit in terms of genre? I sort of had them picked very broadly as, you know, African themed action thrillers, adventure stories.
Yeah.
Would you say that that is true for all of your books, or do you see there's some crossover between different genres in your
I would say
different
some of
books?
them cross genres, but most of them fit in that sort of family saga to the action adventure thriller, definitely. Some of them have more romantic elements than others, and some of them have more thriller elements than others. But definitely multi-genre, they sort of mishmash together.
So when you say the books are set in Africa, are they set in a particular country within Africa?
Normally Southern Africa, because I haven't actually been to Northern Africa. So I sort of like write about what I'm familiar with and what I can, because I write in so many different perspectives as well. So I write in, you know, a black lady or a black man and a white lady and a white man, or a colored or an Indian, or, you know, whatever color I'm writing in. And that's sort of what I'm familiar with is the south of Africa. So, you know, I did write in an Arab in Song of the Starlings, but the Arab is living down in Africa, you know, in South Africa. So he's sort of been more influenced by the culture down there, because the culture from the top of Africa is very different to the culture at the bottom of Africa. You know, their gods are different, their superstitions are different. Yeah, there's you know, a huge difference. So mostly in Southern Africa, sort of like, you know, sort of like Angola, the Congo, across Malawi, Tanzania, sort of downwards is sort of where I would typically write. Mostly Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, Mozambique. I'm familiar with those, and yeah. So
would you ever go back to live in Africa?
Not to live. No, not to live.
I asked that tongue in cheek because I know a lot of South Africans. There's a lot of paramedics who are South Africans, and they left because of the violence, and obviously they're confronting a lot of that violence, and you know, having to take a gun on their shifts with them. So yeah, I gathered you probably wouldn't want to go back, but
we didn't leave because of violence.
Yes.
But no, we didn't leave because of violence. We actually lived because we were living the life that everybody expected us to live, and we weren't living our own lives. So we actually left to live our own life. And and so for us it's lovely when I go back, because I don't have, thank goodness, I don't have any of those bad experiences that a lot of South Africans have had, you know, and I mean, obviously there's been bad experiences, but I don't have, you know, I wasn't shot or anything like that. So, you know, I'm good. So
that's good. That's good.
It is good. So yeah, so you know, I love going back, and I think going back as a tourist, I really appreciate that country so much more, and I appreciate the people so much more as well, because I'm not involved in the everyday, you know, what's going on and stuff like that. It's much easier to just come in, you know. When you're paying $2 for a drink, you know, for a cocktail, it's a lot easier than paying, you know, 20 Rand, you know. So so it's just yeah, as a tourist, I would find it very difficult, because I'm very, very close to my boys, and they would never go live in Africa. You know, they are Aussies. So yeah.
And in terms of your books and your inspirations behind your ideas, how much of your own personal knowledge and experience, having been born in Zimbabwe, growing, you know, spending time in South Africa, so your own personal experiences, how much of that has inspired your stories?
A lot of it. I think growing up in a war zone was very different, and I just thought it was normal. Whereas, you know, and I thought it was normal for 8-year-olds to know how to throw a hand grenade. And I thought it was normal, you know, to be able to shoot and kill things. And I had absolutely no respect for life. And I just think that it was what it was. But you know, living away and coming out of that environment, and like now I will not, you know, I will still shoot. If I get a chance, I'll still pick up a weapon and shoot. I still love guns. My husband's totally anti them. I still absolutely love weapons, but I will not have one myself, and I will not go and kill something, you know, unless it's kill or be killed. That's a different situation, totally. But I won't go hunting. I'm now absolutely against that. And although I'll write hunting scenes, and I still have to check with the hunters that I've got everything and stuff like that. So, but the same thing, you know, when I write about army, you know, I go check with army people. So it's it's very much, in the beginning, I wrote a lot about personal stuff, but I sort of like swayed away from that quite early on. Like I've never, you know, myself experienced anything to do with child trafficking, you know, and so, which is good. Whereas, you know,
it's good. Yeah. Yeah, I wrote about people smuggling in one of my books, and yeah, I've had not a lot much to do with that. So you do have to use a bit of imagination.
yeah but it's you know, whereas in my earlier books, like I wrote about, you know, like somebody losing their dad at 12, which was a personal experience. My dad did not die in combat. He didn't get shot or anything like that. He just died of leukemia. But I wrote about, okay, changing countries as a 12-year-old and how it felt. So I used that sort of, you know, in a book, because I could remember that feeling of just having everything taken away from me. So it was so I do use a lot of my own things. But in saying that, I also, you know, I also use a lot of newspaper articles, and I look through a lot of magazines, and I'm always online, and I belong to a whole lot of groups, you know, so I still try and keep on top of what's going on. And sometimes there's just something small, like when I wrote Shooting Butterflies, there was this tiny little piece on the news, which was about this they had found these children hanging in a thorn bush, and it was obviously, you know, a traditional killing, and a new chief was being crowned in the area. And it was just so blasé, and like, you know, there wasn't going to be any investigation or anything like that. Whereas, you know, the Australian in me was like outraged that, you know, these kids could actually die and nobody was going to do anything about it. They just accepted it as a traditional, you know, Muti killing. And so,
sorry, can you just explain that? What you know, for people who are foreign to that term of, you know, another traditional killing, can you explain what that means?
So the tradition, so in Africa, you've got all your different traditions. So you've got your Zulus, you've got your, you know, there's 11 different tribal languages just spoken in South Africa alone. That's before you go out of South Africa. So every single one of them have got their different traditions and their different beliefs and everything else. Now, one of this was a Zimbabwe little article that was found, and, you know, so it's one of their traditional things that when and it's an old tradition. I've never seen anything else about it on the news. It was like this one little thing. And it's when a new chief was being inducted and becoming the chief of his people, they made a sacrifice. You know, the Sangoma would have made the sacrifice. A Sangoma is like a witch doctor or a healer would have made the sacrifice for them, so that, you know, he would have a good, you know, he would be a good chief. The same as, like, you know, that they will, you know, they don't like eating crocodiles because the crocodiles eat their people, so they don't want to consume their souls. You know, so you know, there's different people have different beliefs. And, you know, when I grew up in an Ndebele place. So for me, I don't like having a mask on the wall, because for me, the Tokolosh can come out the mask and come and possess me, which a Tokolosh is like a spirit, which is totally ridiculous. Because, you know, I mean, my mom was, you know, became a missionary. We were very much brought up as a Christian family, but I still believe, you know, that stuff comes out of walls and that you can be possessed because of my upbringing. So it's just different traditions are just, and because they all sort of shared, and everybody sort of like, you know, just it's So yes, a muti killing is something that happens for a medication or to make something better. So you hear about like the vultures being killed and all their heads being cut off, and then because they're using the heads in their type of witchcraft to be able to stop whatever it is that they are used for.
So in a case like that, where children are being sacrificed as part of a ritual, would the authorities investigate that, or is it deemed it's a traditional ritual and it just doesn't get looked at?
They leave it. They leave it. That's the sad thing. That's what infuriated me and I wanted to bring attention to that. It's that they leave it. It's the same thing in my first book. I brought attention to the albinos, because the albinos are absolutely persecuted. Even when they die, they go and get, somebody goes and they dig them up and they use their bodies for in medication.
Take the bones.
And they use the bones. And so it's, so in using one and then, like just bringing attention to that, even though I had him as the villain, it sort of like just brings attention to little things which I think are in the wrong.
And just on that point, it's probably a good way to segue into the question. I was going to ask you about research. Maybe we can come back to that. But in terms of issues, social issues, when you come up with an idea that inspires you, you talked about the story about the ritual killings of these children, and that inspired a story idea that you wanted to convey that message. Is that kind of how it often works for you when you come up with these story ideas, that it might start with some sort of social issue, whether it's themes such as wars, civil wars, conflicts, animal poaching, corruption, other social injustices, cultural issues, violence and racism, child exploitation, all these things? Is that where the story?
Some really touchy subjects, I do. Yes, a lot of it is chosen because I want to bring it in, and I want to have my say on it without actually getting on a soapbox and giving my political view. Because I always try and be like, I always say, I'm not a political person, but I have my views, but I just put them out into the world in a different way.
So would it be fair to say that with your adult books, there's a balance between, for you, there's an important theme that you want to get across. It's an important social issue, balancing that with also just wanting to be a good creative writer and telling an interesting yarn that people enjoy to read?
Absolutely. But there's always a social issue, an animal issue in the books. There's always two issues going through each book. So you always find like some animal thing, some human thing going together through the book. So yes, it is important to me. And I guess I never really noticed it before, but a reader pointed out to me that everything is always about going home and going to Africa and going. So it's like there's always that theme running there as well about, returning to Africa, which obviously I do return there, but I don't return there as often as I would love to return there. And I will never, and like Carrie asked me, no, I will never live there again. It's not at the moment.
You did say that you lived, you did live in England. Have you not been tempted to write any stories based in England?
No.
Nah.
Actually,
weather's too crap.
I'm lying. Actually, my book that I'm writing at the moment is set in 1870. It's a dual timeline. And in 1870, the heir to the Duke thing actually goes back to England and then comes back to Africa. But you hardly see any of the England there. You just know he's been there and that's it. I don't think I could do justice to England. It's such an amazing, the castles and the actual pomp and ceremony. I don't think I could do that justice.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Not many of us lived in castles, though. That's the only thing. It's sort of sort of elitist bit, Vast majority of people are in houses, and
I just lived with the Smurfs too. Don't worry.
A question about research. You've kind of alluded to it in terms of keeping up to date with with social issues and reading newspapers and what are the contemporary issues. But you also write stories with historical, whether they're historical stories or there's a historical aspect to your story. I think it was last year you went back to South Africa and you said you were doing some location research. So can you tell us about that?
I had the most amazing 2 months in Africa last year. Maybe it was the year before now, 22. And it was just amazing. So I went through Kruger. So now I had written a book in Kruger National Park where I had passed through, and I had the help of an amazing game guard who had been a game ranger there for 45 years. And he had helped me with the roads and the internal roads and stuff, and where to hide like this truck with the horses, and where to cross, and who to actually see during that time of conflict. And because at the time Mozambique was at war still, and and so he actually gave me names of people. Oh no, this guy used to come over and chat and stuff like that. So I could actually then, I had like the real life experience, and I could just base it on that, and then obviously just put in my author spin. But 2 years ago, we went, and I knew that I wanted to go to Crook's Corner, which is where you have Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa. They sort of meet in a confluence on the river. And there was this, there's all these stories that have come out about Crook's Corner, but I really, really wanted to go there because I knew that the book that I was about to start writing, which is the one I'm still writing now, sort of, it used that corner to cross, from Zimbabwe across. And then when I actually got there this time, and I was at Crook's Corner, they had floods, and I could see where the water had been and how it was just not, possible. And then it just ticked on another thing, and it was like, oh, hang on, I can put the flood in instead. So it was, yeah, so I got to actually walk where my elephant's relocation is going to happen in at the top of Kruger National Park, which was just amazing, absolutely amazing. And to be able to actually do that and go, these are the trees that I can show in the story, and just the feel of everything. It was just pretty amazing. And then just talking to all the people, I spoke to so many of the game guards within Kruger itself about different experiences that they had, and it was just it was something very different. So in Zimbabwe, when I did it, I got to actually go to with an anti-poaching unit up at the Hwange National Park. So my cousins actually have a safari lodge there. They have a concession, and they have safari lodges there. So they have Sable, Kulu, and Ivory Lodge are up there. And then so I got to go with their anti-poaching guards and actually go out and see what they were doing, and visit them in the bush. I was like driven in, and that, and it was just, I got to do some really amazing things that not many people get, would normally get to do. So it was just, like the one lady, she was saying, that they go into the bush with a stick, they're not even armed, and they basically are going to go, they're just trying to stop the locals coming in and shooting the bush meat. The big anti-poaching units down in Kruger, they're obviously different. They've got a rhino problem. They've got, they've got a definite problem. But up in Africa, in Zimbabwe, it's a lot of just bush poaching, like the locals coming in and taking the animals by snares. So there's a lot of snare patrols and stuff like that. And this one lady who was, oh man, she was early 20s, and she was telling me how she was on patrol, and there was this elephant in must, and how she hid behind this tree, and how this elephant had come for her, and she had basically just smacked him with this branch that she had, and shouted at him, and then he ran away. And I'm going, well, how many people would actually have the guts to just, trust that this elephant's not going to just flatten the tree and put his tusks through you? But she smacked him with this. So it's like, I got to meet the most incredible people like that. And I think that type of thing you don't get to do when you're sitting on the internet and just, research.
No.
So,
And the best thing is you can offset it against tax.
this is true.
So do you think, that immersing yourself in those experiences, how much did that add, or sort of add extra value, or lift your writing?
I think this book already lifted this book a lot. So we'd already had experience of elephants when I was a teenager. So my uncle had 3 elephants, and I'd already experienced them as a teenager. And then to now go back and see, the elephants again, like 30 years later, it's a big difference. And it's, so I could now write from, you know, from both those perspectives, which was really good. And yes, absolutely. I think it lifted this new story to a totally new level. Hopefully everybody will think that when they read it, but